When I was in the 10th grade, I made a mistake. Or at least that's what everyone told me. My own mother looked me in the eye, pointed to the door, and said, "You're not my daughter anymore." My name is Lydia, and this is my story. I was 15, pregnant, and a dwarf. A combination my mother said would make me unworthy of love, unworthy of family, unworthy of life itself. But the truth that came years later, it silenced everyone who doubted me. Before I tell you how that night changed everything, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one. You should also drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I go through every single comment. I remembered that night as if it were yesterday. The air was damp, the streetlights flickered, and my heart beat so loud I thought the neighbors could hear it. My school bag felt heavier than ever, not because of books, but because of the secret I carried inside me. I was 15 years old, a 10th grader, and already the world had found a way to brand me with shame. Walking up the steps to our porch, my short legs trembled under the weight of what I needed to say. Being a dwarf had always made me the center of whispers at school. Kids laughed, teachers pitied, and even my relatives treated me like something fragile, breakable, incomplete. But tonight wasn't about my height. Tonight was about something I couldn't hide anymore. The door creaked open before I even reached for the handle. My mother stood there, her eyes dark and sharp like broken glass. For a second, I thought I still had time to find the right words, but she already knew. "The school called," she said flatly. Her voice carried no warmth, no trace of the woman who once braided my hair before class. "They said you fainted in the hallway. They said you're pregnant." My throat tightened. I hadn't expected her to find out this way. My plan was to sit her down, to cry, to beg for her understanding, but now all I could do was stare at her, my mouth dry, my knees weak. I was going to tell you, I needed time." "Time?" She let out a bitter laugh. "What time does a child need to tell her mother she's ruined everything?" Her words cut deeper than any schoolyard insult ever had. I wanted to remind her that I wasn't just a mistake walking through her door. I was her daughter. I was carrying life. But the more I tried to find words, the more her glare pushed them back down my throat. "You think being small has made life hard?" she hissed, stepping closer. "Wait until they see you in a maternity dress at 16. Wait until they laugh in church, whisper in the market. I will not be humiliated by you." Her words left me frozen. I thought she'd shout, maybe cry, maybe slam a door. But instead she did something worse. She pointed. Her finger aimed at the front door like it was a loaded gun. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack. It was cold, final. "You're not my daughter anymore." The slam of the door echoed in my ears long after my mother turned the lock. I stood there, frozen, the night pressing against me like a punishment. The porch light buzzed, flickered, and died, leaving me in the dark, with nothing but my school bag and the weight of a secret too heavy for my 15-year-old shoulders. I sank down onto the concrete steps, the rough surface biting into my legs. The on wind cut through my sweater, and for the first time that day, I wrapped my arms around myself, not to hide the small curve of my belly, but to stop the shivering that wouldn't let me breathe. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that she would calm down, open the door, and let me back in. Mothers don't throw away their daughters, not for being small, not for being pregnant, not for making mistakes. But as the hours dragged on, the silence inside the house grew louder than the night crickets outside. Somewhere near midnight, the neighbor's window creaked open. Mrs. Green, the woman who lived next door, peered out, her silhouette framed by the pale glow of her kitchen light. Her voice was a whisper, sharp enough to cut through the night air. "She did this before, you know." she said. I blinked, thinking I had imagined it. What? Your mother, Mrs. Green continued, her words carried by the wind. Years ago, she sent her own sister away, pregnant too. The family never talks about it, but I remember. She doesn't change. Her words hit harder than the cold. My mother wasn't just reacting to me. She was repeating a pattern, a legacy of rejection, a cruel tradition disguised as discipline. The window shut as quickly as it had opened, leaving me more alone than before. But now I knew something I couldn't unknow. I wasn't the first, and maybe I wouldn't be the last. The night stretched on. Every sound was sharper. The creak of branches, the bark of a stray dog, the hum of a passing car. My body ached against the concrete, every inch of me aware of how small I really was. A dwarf girl, invisible in a world too big, discarded by the one person who should have fought for me. I pressed my hands against my stomach, feeling the faintest resistance beneath my palms. The life inside me was fragile, depending on me to survive. My throat burned as the tears finally came. Please hold on, I whispered into the dark, my words trembling like a prayer. Please, just hold on. And in that moment, with the cold concrete beneath me and the silence of rejection above me, I realized this wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance.
By morning, my body was stiff from the cold, but my mind was on fire with one thought. I had to find him, the boy who had promised me forever in the quiet corners of the school library, who swore that love didn't care about height or rumors or the weight of the world. If anyone would stand by me now, it had to be him. I gathered what little courage I had and walked the long road across town, each step heavier than the last. When I reached his house, the blinds were drawn, the yard empty, the driveway clear. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that warned you something was gone. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder, my small fists echoing against the wood. Finally, the door opened, not to him, but to his neighbor, a man in a wrinkled shirt who looked me over with a pity I was already tired of receiving. They left last night, he said simply. My heart dropped. What do you mean, left? His parents packed everything. Moving truck came after midnight, gone by dawn. I stood there, stunned, my voice lost in the fog of disbelief. They hadn't just taken their son away from a scandal. They had taken away my chance at support, my chance at not facing this alone. And then the truth hit me harder. They had planned this, the secrecy, the timing. It wasn't sudden, it was strategy. While I was on the porch begging my mother to see me, his parents were erasing me from his life. I stumbled back down the steps, my legs trembling not from my dwarf frame, but from the crushing weight of rejection. Again. The world seemed too big, too merciless, and I was too small to fight it. Days blurred together after that. I dragged myself through school halls, whispers curling around me like smoke. My locker was plastered with cruel notes. Short and pregnant. Who's the father? Freak show. Each word carved deeper. But I kept walking, one hand always brushing my belly as if to shield it from the world's poison. Then, one afternoon, as I slumped onto my bed at the volunteer's house, I saw it. A letter. My name scrawled across the envelope in handwriting I knew better than my own. My heart leapt, foolishly hoping it was his apology, his promise to return. Hands shaking, I tore it open. Just one line stared back at me, written in haste, the ink smudged at the edges. Don't look for me. The words blurred as my tears fell onto the page. Not a promise, not even an explanation, just finality. My chest tightened, my throat closing as I clutched the letter to my chest. The boy I once thought would fight for me had been taken away, and with those 4 words, he chose silence over me.
After the letter, I felt like I had been erased twice. First by my own mother, and then by the boy who had sworn he loved me. My world had shrunk down to my school bag, a porch step, and the echo of words meant to bury me. If not for Mrs. Carter, I don't know if I would have survived. She was a church volunteer who noticed me sitting outside one too many nights, shivering against the cold. Her house smelled like cinnamon and old hymn books, and when she opened the door for me, it felt like stepping into another world. "You'll stay here until you can figure things out," she said firmly, pressing a warm blanket into my arms. Her tone wasn't pitying. It was decisive, like she was taking in a stray that deserved saving. I remember looking around her small living room. Faded floral wallpaper, mismatched furniture, a wooden cross above the doorway. It wasn't much, but to me, it was a palace compared to the hard concrete I'd been sleeping on. Still, I couldn't help but feel out of place. My short legs dangled awkwardly from her couch, not touching the ground, my hands clutching the blanket as if it might disappear. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, my voice a whisper, fragile and unsure. She hesitated before sitting down beside me. Her eyes softened, her hand resting gently on mine. "Because once, a long time ago, I was you." I frowned, unsure if I heard right. She nodded slowly. "I was 16, pregnant. My parents told me I'd ruined their name. They threw me out. Back then, there was no one to catch me when I fell. I swore if I ever saw a girl standing where I once stood, I'd never let her go through it alone." Her words sank into me like medicine, bitter, healing, necessary. For the first time, I realized my suffering wasn't unique. My mother's cruelty wasn't a one-time act. It was part of a cycle, one that crushed girls like me generation after generation. I looked at Mrs. Carter and saw more than kindness. I saw survival. And survival meant maybe, just maybe, I could make it too. That night, tucked beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender, I let my guard down for the first time in weeks. The room was quiet, save for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. My hand drifted to my stomach, half conscious, half afraid. And then I felt it. A flutter, a gentle push from within, small but undeniable. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed my palm against my belly. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't only from sorrow. "My baby, you're really there." The tiny kick was proof that life continued even when love failed, proof that I wasn't entirely alone. The smell of disinfectant and stale coffee clung to the welfare office like a second skin. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my short legs swinging above the floor, my hands clutching a folder of forms I barely understood. Around me, the room buzzed with murmurs, the shuffle of papers, the occasional sharp call of a clerk's voice, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady, anxious, relentless. I was only 16. I should have been worried about homework and school dances, not government documents that would decide whether I had a family anymore. Mrs. Carter had taken the morning off work to bring me there. She sat beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder, her presence an anchor. Still, I couldn't shake the shame. People's eyes lingered on me, whispering, some at my belly, some at my height, all at the girl who looked too young, too small to be sitting there alone. When my name was called, my chest tightened. The clerk, a woman with glasses perched on her nose, slid a stack of papers across the counter. "These need your signature." I frowned, skimming the unfamiliar words. "Why, what are they?" She adjusted her glasses. Emancipation documents. It's a legal process. You'll be declared an independent minor, no longer under your parents' custody. Her words stung, each one a knife. Independent minor. A fancy way of saying abandoned. I looked at her in confusion. But I didn't ask for this. She hesitated, lowering her voice. It wasn't your request. Your mother filed it. Months ago. The room seemed to tilt. My mother hadn't just rejected me in anger that night. She had planned my erasure. She had prepared for the moment she could wipe her hands clean and make sure I had no way back. Mrs. Carter squeezed my shoulder, grounding me. But the weight of betrayal sat heavy in my chest. My mother hadn't just locked me out of the house, she had locked me out of her life, officially, permanently. The clerk tapped the pen against the paper, impatient. You need to sign to process it. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. It felt heavier than anything I had ever held. With every stroke of my name, I felt the invisible cord between me and my mother snapping, strand by strand, until there was nothing left. When I set the pen down, my chest felt hollow. I was no longer her daughter on paper, just a name in a file, stamped and shelved. Mrs. Carter whispered, "You're stronger than she'll ever know." But in that moment, I didn't feel strong. I felt small, disposable, erased. The clerk stamped the final page, the sound echoing like a gavel. My fate sealed. The hospital lights were blinding, sterile beams that made everything look colder than it already felt. My body trembled on the thin mattress, sweat beading on my forehead, pain tearing through me in waves so strong I thought they would break me in half. I wanted someone to hold my hand, to whisper that I could do this, but there was no one. My mother was gone, the boy was gone, and Mrs. Carter was kept outside, not allowed into the delivery room. It was just me. Me and the life fighting its way into the world. The nurses moved quickly around me, their faces businesslike, their voices clipped. One of them, though, kept glancing my way with eyes that softened every time I cried out. She was older, her hair tucked neatly under her cap, her hands steady, even when mine shook. When I screamed through another contraction, she leaned close, whispering, "You're not alone. Not tonight." Hours blurred together until finally, with one final push, the air split with a sound that silenced everything else. My baby's cry. Thin, fragile, yet louder than any word ever spoken to me. The sound filled the room, filled my chest, filled every crack that rejection had left inside me. Tears poured down my cheeks as I reached out, desperate to hold the tiny life I had carried through shame and exile. But before I could, the older nurse slipped something into my hand. A small bracelet, the hospital kind, but this one bore my name. "Keep it," she whispered quickly. "For her, so she always knows who you are." Then she gently placed the baby in my arms. I stared down at her face, so small, so perfect, her skin warm against my chest. For the first time in months, the fear loosened its grip. She was mine. My miracle, my proof that love could still exist in a world that had done everything to erase me. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll never leave you, not like they did to me." The nurse gave me a soft smile before walking away, but when the clerk returned with the birth certificate forms, my hands froze. The paper was blank where my mother's name should have been, a gaping hole where family was meant to be written. My name was there, small, lonely, standing on its own. The space that should have held my mother's, connecting me to something larger, was empty, erased, just like she wanted. I looked down at my baby, clutching her closer as her cries echoed against the sterile white walls. She had no grandmother, no family tree to claim her, no past waiting to embrace her. She had only me. And in that moment, I realized, for her, I would be enough. 8 years can pass in the blink of an eye, yet every day of them left its mark on me. Gone was the terrified girl sitting on a porch step, begging her unborn child to hold on. I had built a life, fragile, modest, but ours. My daughter grew alongside my strength, both of us learning to navigate a world that didn't always welcome us. Mornings were chaos and comfort all at once. I'd rush her through brushing her hair, tying her shoelaces, while she giggled at my short arms struggling to keep pace. I was still a dwarf, still underestimated wherever I went, but my daughter looked at me with nothing but pride. To her, I wasn't small. I was Mom, her whole world. We lived in a tiny rented apartment above a bakery, the scent of fresh bread filling our mornings. I worked long shifts at the diner nearby, my legs aching from hours on my feet. But every tired evening was worth it when I came home to her stories, her laughter, her drawings taped to the wall like priceless art. At school, she didn't just keep up, she soared. One afternoon, her teacher called me aside, her eyes wide with admiration. "Lydia, your daughter is exceptional," she said, her voice brimming with awe. "Her mind works differently. She sees patterns others miss. She's not just bright, she's gifted." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I had always known my little girl was special, but to hear it confirmed felt like justice. The child the world tried to erase was standing out, shining brighter than anyone expected. But pride was never free of fear. As I watched her run across the schoolyard, her laughter trailing in the wind, I couldn't shake the feeling that life had been too quiet for too long. That kind of peace doesn't last in my story. And then I saw it. At first, I thought I was imagining things. A sleek car parked at the far edge of the schoolyard, engine off, windows tinted. The sight made my stomach tighten. I knew that car. I knew its color, its shape, the way it seemed to loom even while standing still. That car had once been parked in front of my childhood home. That car had once taken me places I didn't want to go. That car belonged to the people who erased me. My mother's car. I froze, clutching my daughter's backpack straps tighter as she skipped back toward me, blissfully unaware. My throat went dry, my heart hammering against my ribs. After 8 years of silence, the past was waiting outside the school gates. I thought maybe I was wrong about the car. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it belonged to another parent. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I tried to brush it off as I hurried my daughter home. But the next evening, there she was, standing at the bottom of my apartment steps as though she had never thrown me away. My mother. 8 years had carved lines into her face, but her posture was still sharp, her presence still commanding. She wore her usual pearls, her lips painted in the same deep shade she used when lecturing me about appearances. For a moment, I felt 15 again, small and trembling under her shadow. "Lydia," she said softly, too softly, "you've grown into a woman, and look at her." Her eyes slid to my daughter, who clung to my hand, her gaze wary. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." Her words were wrong, too smooth, like velvet covering glass shards. I narrowed my eyes. "Why are you here?" "I've changed," she answered quickly, hands clasped as if rehearsed. "I see now that I made mistakes, but I've been watching." She caught herself, but it was too late. My blood ran cold. "Watching?" I repeated. She hesitated, then smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "I mean, I've kept up with you. I know where you live, where you work, the school your daughter attends. I know she's gifted." My breath caught. She knew things she shouldn't, things that proved her absence wasn't ignorance, it was surveillance. She hadn't come back because of love. She had been waiting, lurking in the background, pulling details into a neat little folder until the moment she could use them. My daughter looked up at me, sensing my tension. I squeezed her hand, whispering, "Go upstairs, sweetheart." She obeyed, but not before giving my mother one last suspicious glance. The door clicked shut above us, leaving me alone on the steps with the woman who had erased me. "You don't get to do this," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You don't get to show up after 8 years and pretend you care." Her smile dropped, the mask cracking. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, crisp and heavy. She pressed it into my hand, her eyes cold again, the way they had been the night she threw me out. "You'll hear from our lawyer," she said simply. "This isn't over." I stared down at the envelope, my hand shaking. Something inside me already knew what it meant. Custody. The people who had abandoned me at 15 now wanted to take away the only person I had left.
The knock at the door was sharp, official, the kind that makes your stomach twist before you even open it. I thought maybe it was a delivery, maybe a neighbor. But when I cracked the door, a man in a suit stood there, expression blank, a folder in his hand. "Lydia Hart?" he asked. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. He handed me the folder, tipped his hat, and walked away without another word. My fingers trembled as I peeled the papers open, the heavy stamp of the court staring back at me. Custody petition. My mother's name and my father's, written in bold ink as petitioners. They weren't asking. They were suing me for my own child. The room spun. I staggered back to the couch, clutching the folder as though it might burn me. My eyes scanned the words, each line cutting deeper. Claims of unfit parenting, lack of financial stability, inability to provide appropriate stature and support. They didn't even try to hide it. My height was a weapon against me, on paper, just as it had been in whispers all my life. But then came the detail that froze me cold. Buried in the legal jargon was a phrase: petitioners seek custody to secure the family inheritance tied to the first grandchild. It wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It wasn't even guilt. It was money. They didn't see my daughter as flesh and blood. They saw her as a key, one that could unlock a fortune they had no right to. I pressed my hands against my face, my chest heaving. The betrayal was so sharp I thought it might split me open. My parents hadn't wanted me as their daughter. Now they wanted my child as their prize. The sound of little footsteps pulled me from my spiral. My daughter padded into the room, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her eyes, so bright and curious, looked between me and the papers in my lap. "Mom?" she asked softly. "Why are you crying?" I quickly wiped my cheeks, forcing a smile that cracked before it reached my eyes. "It's nothing, sweetheart, just papers." But she wasn't fooled. She came closer, her small hand resting on mine. Her eyes narrowed in a way that reminded me too much of my own. Then she asked the question I wasn't ready for. "Why does Grandma want to take me away?" Her voice was small, fragile, yet louder than any court summons. My heart broke in that instant because I realized she already understood more than I wanted her to. And for the first time, I didn't know how to answer. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old dust, the kind of place where words weighed more than fists. I sat at the long table, my hands clenched together so tightly the knuckles burned. My parents sat across from me, dressed like royalty, their lawyer straight-backed and confident. They looked calm, collected, as if they were here for a business deal, not a battle for my child's life. I felt small, not just in my stature, but in the way every eye seemed to linger on me a little longer. A dwarf woman, raising a child alone, facing parents who looked like the perfect family portrait. I could hear the whispers, even though no one's lips moved. "She doesn't stand a chance." The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the room fell silent. Papers shuffled, pens clicked, hearts pounded.
The hearing began. Their lawyer spoke first, his voice smooth, confident, dripping with poison. Your Honor, my clients seek custody of their granddaughter due to grave concerns about Miss Hart's ability to provide stability. She has no family support, limited finances, and her condition, he glanced at me as if my height were a defect, makes it difficult to provide an environment suited for a growing child. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from breaking. Every word was a dagger dressed in polite formality. Then my lawyer, a thin man with kind eyes, rose slowly. Your Honor, we have evidence that this case is not about love or concern for the child. It is about money, specifically inheritance. He placed the stack of papers on the desk with deliberate care. And in uncovering these motives, we also uncovered something far more troubling. The judge leaned forward. Go on. My lawyer lifted one page, holding it high enough for the court to see. This is a document filed years ago. Emancipation papers, declaring Ms. Hart an independent minor at the age of 16. But we have reason to believe this was not Lydia's request at all. The handwriting, the signatures, and the timing suggest it was forged, filed not to protect her, but to sever her rights, to erase her place in her family long before this case began. Gasps rippled through the room. My parents' faces remained frozen, but their stillness was louder than any denial. My stomach dropped. He had found it. Proof that what I had lived through wasn't just cruelty, it was calculated. The judge's gaze shifted from the paper to my parents, then to me. His eyes narrow, heavy with consideration. If these documents are indeed fraudulent, he said slowly, then this case is not merely about custody. It is about deception. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. But I need more than paperwork. I need proof, living proof, that Ms. Hart has raised this child, that she has provided care, stability, and love. The words thundered through the courtroom. My hands tightened on my lap, my heart racing. How could I prove something that lived in bedtime stories, scraped knees, late-night fevers, and whispered prayers? The judge's gaze pinned me like a spotlight. He said, "Bring me your proof, or risk losing her." The next hearing day felt heavier than the first. I sat at the long wooden table again, clutching my daughter's small drawing she had slipped into my hand that morning. "Good luck, Mom," she had written in crooked letters, a tiny heart beside it. That scrap of paper was my shield as I faced the people who had once called themselves my parents. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Miss Hart, you claim you have raised this child alone. Do you have witnesses who can testify to that?" My lawyer nodded. "We do, Your Honor." He turned and the first figure stepped forward. It was Mrs. Green, the neighbor who had whispered to me through her window that night 8 years ago. She looked smaller now, her hair grayer, but her voice was firm. "I remember the night her mother threw her out," she said, pointing across the room at my parents. "That girl slept on the porch. I watched her cry herself to sleep, and when she left with a swollen belly, I knew she was carrying the weight alone." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. My chest tightened, but before the tears could fall, the next witness approached. Mrs. Carter, the woman who had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go. She wore her Sunday dress, her hands trembling as she held the Bible to swear in, but her voice rang clear. "I gave her a bed when her own mother would not. I saw her work jobs to keep food on the table. I watched her hold that baby through fevers, through nights of tears, through everything. That child knows her mother because her mother never stopped fighting." The courtroom fell silent for a moment, the kind of silence that weighed more than noise. My parents shifted uncomfortably, but their eyes stayed on the table, refusing to meet mine. And then, just as I thought the testimonies were over, the door creaked open. A figure walked in, hesitant but steady. My breath caught in my throat. Him! The baby's father. Older now, taller, his jaw sharper, but those eyes. I knew them. He cleared his throat, his hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. He said, "I never wanted to leave her," his voice breaking. "My parents forced me out of town the night she found out. They told me she'd ruin my life, that I'd never have a future with her. I tried to come back, but they threatened me. I thought staying away was protecting her, but I watched. I kept track, and I know she raised that child with nothing but her own strength." Gasps filled the courtroom again. My heart pounded, a mix of rage and sorrow and relief, all tangled into one. Proof! Living proof! The judge's gaze shifted to my parents. "Do you deny this?" My mother's composure cracked for the first time. She shot up from her chair, her voice shrill, desperate. "She doesn't deserve her. She's nothing but—" Her words dissolved into a scream, raw and unpolished, echoing off the courtroom walls. The mask she wore for 8 years was gone, shattered in front of everyone. The courtroom was so quiet, it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My mother's scream still echoed in my ears, her voice stripped of dignity, her mask torn away. She sat back down now, trembling, her pearls clinking faintly against each other as though they, too, were unsettled. The judge's gavel struck once. Order. His voice carried the weight of finality, and the entire room obeyed. My lawyer leaned close, whispering, "Stay steady. We've given him everything he needs." I wanted to believe him, but my heart still thundered in my chest. My hands found the drawing in my lap, the one my daughter had given me, and I held on to it as if it could tether me to hope. The judge cleared his throat. "After reviewing the testimonies, the documents, and the history presented here, this court recognizes that Lydia Hart has been the sole caregiver and provider for her child since birth. She has raised her daughter without family support, without financial assistance, and against deliberate acts meant to erase her rights. The petitioners," his eyes flicked to my parents, "have failed to demonstrate genuine concern for the welfare of this child. Their motives, as evidence has shown, stem not from love, but from financial interest." My stomach clenched as he lifted a paper. Furthermore, inheritance records confirm that the estate they sought is not tied to their custody at all. It is tied directly to the child, the first grandchild. Regardless of guardianship, those funds belong to her and her alone. The room erupted in whispers, shock pulsing like a wave. My breath caught. My parents hadn't just failed to take her, they had failed to take what they really wanted. The judge raised his gavel again. "Therefore, custody remains solely with the mother, Lydia Hart. This case is closed." The gavel struck twice, each echo louder than thunder. Relief crashed over me so suddenly I thought I might collapse. My chest heaved, my throat burned with tears I had fought back for too long. I had won, not just for me, but for my daughter, for the life they tried to steal before it ever began. Across the room, my parents were statues. My father stared ahead, expression stone, but my mother's face twisted as though the world itself had betrayed her. She staggered to her feet, her hand clutching her pearls as her knees buckled. She collapsed back into her chair, her voice a hoarse whisper only the front rows could hear. "It was supposed to be mine." Her words hung in the air, bitter and broken, the confession of a woman who had gambled everything and lost. The courtroom doors swung open, and sunlight spilled in like a spotlight. I held my daughter's hand as we stepped outside, the weight of 8 years lifting with every step. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't walking into exile.
I was walking into freedom. My daughter skipped beside me, her smile wide and fearless. She didn't understand the weight of the battle that had just been fought for her, but she felt the victory. Children always do. She looked up at me, eyes shining. "We won, didn't we, Mom?" I smiled through tears. "Yes, baby, we won." The courthouse behind us loomed tall, but it no longer felt like a place of judgment. It was a monument to the truth that no matter how small the world made me feel, no matter how many times I was erased, I had fought back, and I had won. Every insult, every whisper, every door slammed in my face had led me here. I thought back to the porch where I had begged my unborn child to hold on, to the hospital where her first cry broke through sterile silence, to every long night at the diner, every scraped knee I patched, every fever I soothed. Those were my proofs, my testimony, my evidence that love is stronger than rejection. Behind me, I knew my parents sat defeated, clutching at the shards of a plan that had crumbled in front of everyone. They had tried to take my daughter, not for love, but for greed. And in losing, they showed the world exactly who they were. But I didn't need to see them anymore. My victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in the little hand holding mine. I knelt down to my daughter's level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Listen to me," I whispered. "You were never unwanted. You were never a mistake. You are my miracle. And no one can take you away from me." Her arms wrapped around my neck, and for a moment the whole world felt quiet again. Not the silence of rejection, but the silence of peace. As we walked away, I knew my story was more than survival. It was proof. Proof that even when you're small, even when the world tells you you're unworthy, you can rise, you can fight, you can win. And now, I want to ask you, the ones listening to my story, if your parents abandoned you when you needed them most, and years later they came back not for love, but for greed, would you forgive them, or would you walk away forever? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.